Welcome back to the channel. Thank you guys for subscribing, and let's dive into the bigger lipless crankbait because I feel like a lot of people throw that 1/2 ounce size, but this 3/4 and 1 ounce size doesn't get nearly the amount of use that it should this time of year. Now, I've caught fish when the water's in the high 40s on this bait, so this will work in the winter all the way through the spring when the water's up in the mid to high 50s. Now, the first thing I think when people look at this bait is they go, it's way too big. But if you put it next to a 1/2 ounce chatterbait, the profile of this bait is not too much bigger. Now, this is a windy condition bait. You really do need wind to catch them on this bait. So when you have that chop and you have that water being mixed up, the fish aren't going to be able to really decipher too much of a difference between this and that. So if you can catch fish on your lake on a chatterbait with a full-size trailer, you can catch fish on this 1 ounce or 3/4 ounce lipless crankbait. Now, the lipless crankbait, it's a trap, it's a rattle trap, a lipless, whatever you want to call it. It is a great bait anytime you're fishing around flats year-round, and it just catches big ones. Now, it's very popular this time of year because a lot of those fish in your lake are on flats. I think the next thing that people think about this bait is that it's made for deep water because it's so heavy. I think you want to correlate a 3/4 or a 1 ounce bait like a 3/4 or a 1 ounce jig, and you think, oh, I'm not going to fish that jig any shallower than 10 feet of water. Maybe you're thinking of a 3/4 ounce spinner bait, 3/4 ounce chatterbait, where you're going, I don't fish that any shallower than 6 feet of water. But that is the furthest thing from the truth when it comes to where you can catch fish at with this bait. This bait is killer in that 2.5 to 4 foot range because of how much surface area is on this bait. So when it flutters to the bottom, you have a lot of water being pushed against this bait because it's pushing a lot of water off this bait just for how much surface area. So yeah, these baits are probably equally dense, and this one's heavier, so you would think it sinks, but how much more surface area, they're sinking at about the same rate. So the same rate of fall on this bait as this bait, so you can throw this bait the same places that you can throw this bait. Now, what tends to happen when you are fishing any type of reaction moving bait in shallower water, you're typically fishing off-colored water when you're fishing shallow, and those fish will trap your bait if you're grinding along the bottom. Now, fish love eating baits off the bottom. You just tend to lose a lot of those fish because they're trapping it like a cat does a mouse. And they're the furthest away from the hooks when they do that. So if they come down on the top of it, the hooks are underneath the bait, you're gonna lose a lot of those fish. So it is important, if you're fishing grass or muck or shells, whatever it may be, to keep that bait off the bottom. You do want it to deflect with the bottom. You want it hitting the bottom. You want to be feeling the bottom, but you don't necessarily want to be grinding it into the bottom. Now, this is a heavier bait, so obviously casting it is going to be more fatiguing on your arm. Winding a bait that wiggles and shakes is going to be more fatigue when you're reeling it back. Just fishing this bait in general is not going to be any easier than when you do fish a smaller bait. If you're hooking grass or muck or shells or whatever it may be, add whatever that weighs onto your 3/4 or 1 ounce bait, it's going to be a lot more fatigue on you. So there's nothing about that bigger bait that's easier to fish. My whole point is, though, you can fish this bait on lakes where you think you couldn't necessarily throw a bigger bait, and in areas where you think it may be too shallow. So try that bait in the shallower depth range. Good luck to you guys, and I'll see you on the water.